The woman standing in the doorway of the Conti estate's east parlor that Thursday morning was not what anyone would have called remarkable, not by the standards of the world that lived inside those walls. She was broad-shouldered and soft, with heavy hips and arms that strained slightly at the rolled-up sleeves of her uniform, dark hair pinned back under a pale blue cloth, a mop bucket in one hand, and a caddy of cleaning supplies in the other. She had a small scar above her left eyebrow and the kind of face that had clearly done a great deal of living. Not old, not young, just settled, like a woman who had made peace with exactly who she was and stopped waiting for anyone else's permission to do it. She walked into that parlor the way she walked into every room she was paid to clean. Without ceremony, without apology. Rosaria Conti was 71 years old, the widow of the man who had built one of the most feared criminal organizations in the country, the mother of the man who now ran it, and she had, in 40 years of that life, developed a talent for reading people that bordered on something supernatural. She had watched women walk through the front door of her home on her son's arm. Beautiful women, educated women, women who had rehearsed their smiles in the car mirrors on the way up the driveway, and she had dismissed every single one of them inside of 10 minutes, sometimes 5. Not out of cruelty, out of accuracy. She knew what kind of woman survived this life, and she knew that kind of woman had nothing to do with pedigree or beauty or the careful performance of composure. It had to do with something else entirely, something she had been looking for in every woman Marco brought home for 15 years. She found it, of all places, in a cleaner who didn't know she was being watched. The cleaner's name was Paloma Reyes. She was 29 years old. She had no idea, when she accepted the twice-weekly contract with the Conti estate through the agency that employed her, that she was walking into anything other than a very large, very expensive house that needed its floors mopped and its windows polished. She had cleaned bigger places. She had cleaned meaner places. She had once cleaned the penthouse of a hedge fund manager who had spent 20 minutes following her around to point out areas she'd missed, and she had listened to all of it without once raising her voice. And when she finished, and he handed her a cash tip she hadn't asked for, she'd looked at him and said, "Next time, you could just tell me at the beginning." Then she left. That was Paloma Reyes. She did the work. She said the true thing. She did not perform. She had been cleaning the estate for 3 weeks before she ever encountered Rosaria Conti directly. The old woman had a reputation among the agency staff. Terrifying. The other cleaners said, "She doesn't miss anything." And Paloma had filed that away and done her job with the same steadiness she applied to everything, which was to say, thoroughly, without rushing, without cutting corners, and without flinching at the weight of a room that clearly held a great deal of power in its walls. She was on her knees that Thursday, polishing the baseboard of the east parlor with a soft cloth, the kind of detail work most cleaners skipped because the agency didn't specifically list it and nobody could easily see it, when she felt the prickle of being watched. She finished the section she was on before she looked up. There was no reason to stop good work just because someone was watching it. When she did look up, Rosaria Conti was standing in the doorway in a black dress that probably cost more than Paloma's monthly rent, a single strand of pearls at her throat, her white hair swept up with the kind of precision that took either great money or great practice. She was looking at Paloma with an expression Paloma couldn't immediately read. Not contempt, not warmth, something more careful than either. "You finished the corner before you looked up," Rosaria said. "I hadn't finished it yet," Paloma said. "Most people stop when they feel someone watching them." "Most people," Paloma agreed, getting to her feet and rolling the cloth neatly between her hands, "aren't being paid to finish." A beat of silence. Something crossed Rosaria Conti's face so briefly that Paloma almost missed it. Something that looked, improbably, like the beginning of a smile. "Go on," the old woman said, and stepped back from the doorway, and left. Paloma went on. She did not think much about it, that first time. She had no way of knowing that Rosaria Conti had stood in that hallway for 4 full minutes watching her work before speaking. She had no way of knowing that the old woman had walked back to her private sitting room afterward and picked up the phone and called her son. "Come to dinner on Friday," Rosaria said. "I have a meeting Friday," Marco said. "Move it," she said, and hung up. Marco Conti had not survived 36 years of a life built inside violence and consequence by being sentimental. He was 6'2" and built like a man who had once had to fight his way out of situations that most men only saw in nightmares. with tattoos running from his collar to his wrists and dark eyes that had a quality to them. Stillness, assessment, absolute absence of surprise, that tended to make people uncomfortable in a room with him. He ran the Conti organization with a precision his father had never managed, tighter, cleaner, more controlled, and he had spent the better part of a decade making himself into the kind of man who was not rattled by anything. His mother rattled him. He had never told her that. She already knew. He moved the meeting. He came to dinner on Friday. His mother served him herself, which she hadn't done in months, and she talked about the estate, about the garden, about the new roof section on the east wing, and when Marco reached the bottom of his second glass of wine and felt the particular quality of a silence that meant she was building towards something, he said, "What did you want to tell me?" "Nothing yet," Rosaria said. "I want you to see something first." She would not elaborate. He came back the following Thursday, at 10 in the morning, on his mother's specific instruction, wearing a suit that cost more than some people's cars and a patience he had mostly assembled by reminding himself she was 71 and had buried 2 people she loved before 60 and was owed whatever she asked. He arrived to find the east parlor being cleaned by a woman he had never seen before. She was on her feet this time, working a high window with an extension brush, her back to him, completely unaware he was standing in the doorway. She was humming something under her breath, low and tuneless, the kind of hum that wasn't for anyone, just a thing a person does when they're alone, and she moved the brush in long, even strokes without hurrying, her heavy arms working efficiently, her uniform slightly damp at the back from the effort of the morning's work. His mother appeared at his shoulder, so quietly he startled, which he would never have admitted. "Watch," Rosaria said. He watched. There was nothing, on the surface, to watch. A cleaner doing her job. He almost said this out loud, and then something stopped him, some instinct that had kept him alive through 15 years of decisions other people second-guessed. And he stayed quiet and watched instead. She finished the high window. She stepped back, tilted her head, checked the light, found a streak she'd missed by a quarter inch, went back and fixed it without making a sound about it. Then she moved to the next window. She did not notice him until she turned for the caddy and found him standing in the doorway with a woman who could have been carved from stone. She did not flinch. She looked at Rosaria first. "Ma'am," then at him, briefly, the kind of professional acknowledgement that said, "I see you, and I'm not going anywhere, and this does not change my work. I can come back for this room if you need it." "Finish," Rosaria said. She finished. She worked around them without making them feel accommodated, which was its own particular skill, and when she was done she gathered her caddy and her bucket, and she said, "I'll do the library next," and walked out. Marco turned to his mother. "Who is she?" he said. "Someone who does what she says she'll do," Rosaria said, "and doesn't ask to be watched doing it." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer that matters," his mother said, and walked away to let that land wherever it needed to. Paloma found out about the son the ordinary way. One of the other estate staff mentioned it in passing while she was washing her bucket out in the service area, a remark about how Mr. Conti had been in the East Wing again this week, which apparently was unusual. Paloma filed it away with the same neutrality she applied to everything that wasn't her direct concern, which was, noted, not my business, moving on. She did not, at any point, connect herself to the reason he had been there. She also did not connect herself to the reason that 3 days later the agency called to tell her the Conti estate had requested her specifically for an additional day each week, effective immediately, with an adjusted rate that made her go quiet on the phone for a full 3 seconds before she said yes. She needed the money. Her mother's dialysis treatments were not cheap, and the apartment they shared was 2 months from a rent increase that Paloma was already running the math on in the back of her head at all times. The quiet background arithmetic of a woman who had been holding things together alone for long enough that she no longer thought of it as a burden. It was just the shape of her life, and she carried it the way she carried everything, without putting it down. She showed up on the additional day and cleaned the library, and the upstairs hallway, and the formal dining room where the chandelier had accumulated a specific kind of dust that took patience and a soft brush and nobody had attended to in months. She attended to it. 3 hours. Just the chandelier, working section by section while perched on the estate's rolling library ladder. And when she climbed down and looked up at it, the light through the windows hit the crystals and threw small rainbows across the ceiling, and she stood there for just a moment, tilting her head back to look at it, before she went on to the next thing. Marco Conti was in the doorway of the dining room for the last 20 minutes of the chandelier work. He had come downstairs for something else entirely and found himself unable to move on. He watched her the same way his mother had watched her the first time, trying to identify what it was that the eye kept coming back to. It wasn't beauty, or not only beauty, though she had that in a way nobody in his world would have had the vocabulary to describe, something about the way she occupied space, fully and without apology, the solidity of her, the complete absence of performance. Women in Marco's world performed constantly. They performed ease when they weren't at ease, competence when they were afraid, composure when they were calculating. He had learned to read all of it so automatically that he sometimes felt like every conversation was a translation of something being said in a language nobody admitted to speaking. Paloma Reyes was not performing anything. She was cleaning a chandelier. That was the whole of it. When she came down from the ladder and turned and found him standing there with his hands in his pockets and that dark, assessing stillness in his face, she held his gaze for a moment and said, "Did you need this room?" "No," he said. "Okay," she said, and started packing her supplies. "You've been adding days," he said, "to your contract. The agency called me. I accepted." She looked up briefly. "If there's a problem with the arrangement, I'd rather know now than after I've already scheduled it." "There's no problem," he said. "Okay then," she said again, and picked up her caddy. "Paloma," he said, and she stopped without turning around, because something in the way he said her name, not the usual surprise of someone who'd just looked at a roster, but the deliberateness of a man who had known it for a while and was choosing to use it now, registered in her body before her brain had finished processing it. "How do you know my name?" she said. "It's my estate," he said. "I know everyone who works in it." "That's a reasonable answer," she said. "That doesn't answer the question." Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one. In the same way a room can smell like something without the thing being present. "It's exactly the answer the question asked for," he said. She thought about that for a moment, decided she couldn't argue it without being unreasonable, and left the room. But she thought about it on the bus home, and on the walk from the stop to her building, and later that night, while she made dinner for her mother and listened to the evening medical drama her mother watched every night at 7, she thought, "That man knows exactly what he's doing at all times." And something about that was more interesting than alarming, which told her something about herself that she set aside to examine later. The humiliation arrived at a dinner she had not known she was attending until 48 hours before it happened. Rosaria Conti had called the agency directly, bypassing the usual scheduling entirely, and asked for Paloma to assist the estate staff for a family dinner the following Saturday. It was framed as a serving role, a step outside Paloma's usual contract, and the agency had asked her if she was willing, and she had said yes because the rate was good and she needed the rate. And she had shown up at 6 in the evening in a white staff uniform, hair pinned up, and walked into a dining room full of people who looked at her the way certain people have always looked at women who look like her, as furniture, briefly assessed, and found unremarkable, and promptly ignored. That was fine. She had been ignored in rooms before. She preferred it, mostly. The trouble was Valentina. Valentina was the fiancée of Marco's younger cousin, a woman of spectacular bone structure and equally spectacular cruelty, who had apparently decided at some point in her life that her beauty was a kind of authority and that the people paid to serve her were an extension of the furniture she sat among. She had been watching Paloma from the moment she entered the room with the kind of look that assembled a verdict before the evidence was in, and when Paloma leaned across to refill the water glass beside Valentina's seat, Valentina said, loud enough, deliberate enough, "Do they not have size requirements for service staff here?" The table went quiet. Not the organic, gradual quiet of a conversation naturally pausing. The specific, sudden quiet of a room that has just heard something cruel and is waiting to see what happens next. Paloma finished filling the glass, set the pitcher down on the service tray, straightened up. "They have competence requirements," Paloma said, perfectly level, meeting Valentina's eyes without blinking. "I passed those." A beat. "I don't think she was speaking to you," said Valentina's cousin from 2 seats down, a man with the overfed look of someone who had never once been told no. "She was talking about me in a room I'm standing in," Paloma said. "That counts as speaking to me." Rosaria Conti, at the head of the table, said nothing. She picked up her wine glass and drank from it with an expression that was impossible to interpret from across the room, except that it was not displeasure. Marco was at the other end of the table, and he had heard every word. He had gone very still in the particular way he went still when he was doing the thing that looked like nothing and was actually everything, the full-body calculation that preceded a decision. He watched Paloma pick up the service tray with the same unhurried efficiency she applied to everything, watched her walk back toward the service door without her shoulders dropping an inch, watched the door close behind her. He looked at Valentina. "You will apologize," he said, quiet enough that it took a moment for the words to reach the full table. "Marco," his cousin started. "To her," Marco said. "Tonight, before she leaves." "She's a cleaner," Valentina said, with a disbelief that suggested she genuinely could not parse what was happening. "She's a person in my house," Marco said, "who was insulted by a guest in my house. The distinction between her role and yours ends there." He picked up his fork. "We're done discussing it." Valentina did not apologize. She and her fiancé left before dessert, and the cousin spent 3 weeks after that evening trying to understand why Marco had gone from an ally to something colder, until he eventually stopped trying to understand it and started simply staying out of the way. Paloma found out about the dinner table exchange from one of the kitchen staff the following Tuesday. She processed it in the particular way she processed things that surprised her, quietly, over several days, turning it over without rushing to a conclusion. She did not thank him. She figured he hadn't done it to be thanked. But she thought about it, more than she would have liked to admit. The shift in the architecture of their interactions happened slowly, like a tide rather than a wave. He found reasons to be in rooms she was cleaning. Not obtrusively, never hovering, never disrupting the work, just present in the way a person is present when they're comfortable being near something without needing to perform that comfort. He asked her questions occasionally, the real kind, the kind with no right answer that people ask when they actually want to know. What did she do before the agency? Where had she grown up? Did she always do the unrequested details, the baseboards, the chandelier, or was that specific to here? "I do it everywhere," she said, not looking up from the desk surface she was polishing. "It's not for anyone else. It's just how I do the work." "Why?" he said. She considered the question. "Because the point isn't for someone to notice. The point is for it to be done." He was quiet for a long time after that. When she glanced up, he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read, something between recognition and something more unsettled, like a man who had just heard an idea that reorganized several other ideas he'd already had. "Most people in my life," he said carefully, "do everything for someone to notice." "I know," she said. "You can always tell." She went back to the desk. He stayed in the room for a while longer, and neither of them said anything else, and it was the most honest conversation she could remember having in years. The threat she hadn't known to look for announced itself through the agency. She got the call on a Wednesday evening, a manager she didn't know, not her usual contact, informing her that the Conti contract was under review and that in the interim her schedule had been suspended pending a formal complaint. "What complaint?" she asked. The manager was vague. "A conduct matter. Someone on the estate staff had raised a concern." Paloma sat on the edge of her bed after the call and thought about it, running through the past weeks with the careful, methodical attention she gave to everything. She had not taken anything. She had not spoken out of turn, not since the dinner, which had been, she believed, exactly the right amount of speaking. She had done the work, the full work, every time. She also thought about Valentina, about a cousin who had 3 weeks ago stopped being on Marco's good side and might be looking for a way to recover ground. About how easy it would be, for people in that world, to damage a person who had no armor against that kind of damage. She felt the familiar weight of it, the specific exhaustion of being a woman without power navigating spaces built for people with it, and she let herself feel it for exactly as long as it needed to move through her. Then she got up and made her mother's evening medication and sat with her through the 7 o'clock drama and did not say anything about the call, because her mother had enough on her plate and worry was a luxury neither of them could currently afford. The next morning, she went to the estate anyway, not through the agency's dispatching. She took the bus, walked up the drive, and rang the service entrance bell at 8 in the morning because she had decided, somewhere in the night, that she was not going to be quietly removed from something without at least looking the situation in the face. The housekeeper who answered looked startled. "I understand there's a suspension on my contract," Paloma said. I'd like to speak with whoever made the complaint. That's not usually how this. I know, Paloma said. I'm asking anyway. She was shown to a waiting room she had never sat in before, a formal anteroom off the main hall, and she sat in it for 40 minutes with her back straight and her hands in her lap, and the particular kind of patience that comes not from being comfortable but from having decided to stay. Marco found her there. He had not known she was coming. One of his staff had sent word to him, uncertain what to do with a cleaner who had arrived uninvited and sat down like she belonged. And he had come downstairs expecting something he needed to manage, and instead found Paloma Reyes sitting in the anteroom with her coat still buttoned and her eyes calm, and an expression on her face that said she would wait as long as it took. You weren't supposed to come today, he said. I know, she said. I came anyway. He closed the door behind him. There's a complaint on file with your agency. I know that too. I want to know what it says. He looked at her for a long, measuring moment. It says you removed items from the estate. That's a lie, she said, simply without heat. I know, he said. The weight of those two words, the immediacy of them, the absence of doubt, hit her in a way she hadn't braced for. She held it together. She was good at holding things together. Then why is it on file, she said. Because someone with access to the complaint system filed it, Marco said, and his voice had gone to the flat, dangerous register she had heard him use exactly once before, at the dinner table, and she understood that she was watching the beginning of a decision being made rather than the end of one. Sit tight, he said. Don't go anywhere. I sat in this room for 40 minutes, she said. I think I can manage more. He left. She heard things happen in the house that she couldn't fully track. Footsteps, a door closing somewhere, voices at a distance, and then silence. And then Marco came back into the anteroom 40 minutes later and closed the door again and said, My cousin's fiancé made the complaint through a staff contact she paid for that access. I've terminated the contact's employment. The complaint is being withdrawn. Your contract will be reinstated by this afternoon. Paloma processed this. Your cousin's going to be angry with you. He's been angry with me for 3 weeks, Marco said. It hasn't changed anything yet. It might eventually. It might, he agreed. That's a problem for eventually. She looked at him. He looked at her. The room was very quiet. I'm not going to pretend this was nothing, she said, and she meant Valentina, the complaint, the possibility that she could have lost the contract without ever knowing why, the particular vulnerability of being someone without power when the people with it decided to notice you. Because it wasn't nothing. It was a real thing that could have cost me something I couldn't afford to lose. I know, he said, and there was something different in it this time. Not the quick certainty of before, but something heavier, something that understood the weight of what she'd carried through those 40 minutes in his anteroom, and was not going to look away from it. So thank you, she said. Not for doing me a favor. For doing the right thing. Those are the same thing, he said. Not always, she said. But I'm glad they were this time. Something cracked open in his expression, very slightly, in the way things crack open in people who have been careful for a very long time. He took a step toward her, not decisive, almost tentative, a quality she would not have thought possible in him until that moment. My mother thinks I've missed something obvious for a long time, he said. She's not usually wrong. About what? Paloma said, though something in her chest had already started to answer the question. About the kind of person who does the unrequested thing, he said, not because anyone is watching, but because it's the point. The kind of person who sits in a waiting room uninvited for 40 minutes because they decided to face something instead of waiting to be told what happened to them. He stopped very close to her now, close enough that she could see the careful way he was holding himself, like a man who had learned long ago that moving too fast broke things. I have spent 15 years building something that runs on the labor of people who do everything for show. I don't want to spend the next 15 years doing the same thing in my personal life. That's a very controlled way to say something that isn't very controlled, she said. I know, he said. I'm working on it. The next weeks unfolded in a new shape entirely. He didn't take her to galas or install her in rooms that weren't meant for her. Not immediately, not performatively. What he did was simpler, and in some ways more significant. He made space. He sat in rooms she was working in and talked to her like a person talking to another person. He asked her what she needed and listened to the answer. When she mentioned, once and in passing, that her mother's treatment schedule had become difficult to manage around the agency's hours, The following week brought a contract amendment that made her schedule entirely her own to set, and he never mentioned it as a thing he had done. She mentioned it. "You changed my contract," she said, on a Tuesday in the library. "The agency confirmed it," he said, not looking up from whatever he was reading. "Marco." He looked up. "Thank you," she said. "You said thank you wasn't for favors," he said. "It was for doing the right thing." "Yes," she said. "Thank you." He held her gaze for a moment with an expression she was starting to know, the one that was not quite a smile, but meant he was fighting one, and couldn't fully explain why she was the only person who made that particular fight necessary. The night it nearly came apart was a Saturday in November, cold, the estate lit from within like an ember, and Paloma had stayed late helping the kitchen staff clean up after a small family dinner that had run over. She was leaving through the service entrance, coat buttoned, bag on her shoulder, breath misting in the dark, when she heard voices from the side garden. Two men, low and urgent, a tone that made her slow down without deciding to. She recognized one of the voices as belonging to Davide, Marco's head of external security, a man she had seen dozens of times and found quietly watchful in a way that didn't quite match the warmth everyone else in the estate extended to her. She didn't hear everything. She heard enough. Enough to understand that Davide had been in contact with a rival family, the Morettis, a name she had heard mentioned in passing by kitchen staff as something spoken carefully, and that there was a meeting planned for the following week, and that something about Marco's schedule, his regular Thursday presence at a specific location, had been shared in that meeting. She stood in the cold dark for 3 full seconds. Then she went back inside. She found Marco in his study at 10 at night, coat off, sleeves rolled up, going through papers, and she closed the door behind her and said, "I need you to listen to me without asking how I know what I'm about to tell you." He looked up. Whatever he saw in her face made him put the papers down. "Davide," she said. "The Morettis. Your Thursday schedule." The stillness that came over him then was different from all the other stills she had seen from him. This one had an edge in it. "How much did you hear?" he said quietly. "Enough," she said. "Not everything. Enough." He was on his feet before she finished the second sentence. What happened in the next hour was fast and controlled and largely invisible to her. She was asked to stay in the study, which she did, sitting in the chair across from his desk with her coat still on and her hands folded in her lap in that patient way she had, the way that had first made his mother go quiet in a doorway. She heard Davide's voice at some point, in the hallway, and then not anymore. And then Marco came back, and the edge in his stillness had been replaced with something exhausted, something almost unbearably tired, the look of a man who has just done a hard thing cleanly and is feeling the cost of it. "Thank you," he said, which was the first time he had said it to her directly, and the weight he put in it was enormous. "You would have found out," she said. "Not before Thursday," he said. She nodded. He sat down on the edge of the desk rather than behind it, closer, like the distance between them had been renegotiated by the last hour, and he hadn't found a reason to push it back yet. "Paloma," he said, "I need you to understand what you're in the middle of." "I know what I'm in the middle of," she said. "I've known for a while. And you're still here." "I'm still here," she agreed. He reached over and took her hand from her lap, very deliberately, the same careful way he moved around her always, like a man who understood his own size and velocity and had trained himself to work against them, and held it between both of his. "This world is not safe," he said, "for anyone in it, but especially for people he stopped. Started again. Especially for people I care about making sure are safe." "I know," she said. "I can't ask you to accept that as a condition of—" "You're not asking me," she said. "I'm telling you. I already know. And I'm still sitting in your study at 10 in the evening with my coat on, because I chose to stay." She looked at him steadily. "I don't stay anywhere I haven't decided to be." He looked at her for a long moment. This man who had spent 15 years being the most dangerous thing in every room he occupied, and what was on his face in that moment was something close to undone. "My mother saw it before I did," he said. "What did she see?" Paloma said, though she thought she knew. "Someone who doesn't need anything from me," he said. "Not the money, not the status, not the protection, because you've been protecting yourself your whole life without any of it. Someone who is in this room because she decided to be. Not because it benefits her. Not because I'm—" He gestured at himself, at the study, at the whole weight of what he was and what he ran. "Any of this. Just because she decided." Yes, Paloma said. I don't know what to do with that, he admitted. I'm not sure anyone has ever just decided on me before, without the rest of it attached. Well, she said, you could start by deciding back. 3 months later, Rosaria Conti hosted a dinner for the family. Not the careful, performative kind, the real kind, the small one. The one where the people around the table were the people whose presence in the house was not in question. Paloma sat at Rosaria's right hand. It was not a position anyone had announced or arranged. Rosaria had simply placed the setting there when she was laying the table herself, the way she laid it for people she intended to keep, and when Paloma arrived and saw it, she had looked at the old woman across the dining room with an expression that asked the question without words. Rosaria looked back at her the same way, and the answer was in the steadiness of it. Yes. You. The one who finished the corner before she looked up. Marco came in from the hallway and found the two of them on opposite sides of the room, looking at each other in some silent language he was not entirely party to, and something in his chest shifted in the direction of the thing he had been learning, slowly, to let himself feel. Later, at the table, his mother raised her glass and looked at Paloma and said, I dismissed every woman he brought through that door. I want you to know that. I've heard, Paloma said. I'm not sorry for it, Rosaria said. They weren't right for this life. Not because of what they looked like or where they came from. Because none of them were interested in doing the work. She held Paloma's gaze with the direct, unsparing attention that had frightened better-armored people for decades. You don't do anything for show. No, Paloma said. I know, Rosaria said. That's why you're sitting there. She drank from her glass. Now eat. The food is getting cold. Marco reached under the table and found Paloma's hand, the same way he had in the study, deliberate and careful, and she let him hold it, and the chandelier above the table, cleaned thoroughly, section by section, the small rainbows scattered across the ceiling, threw light across all of them like something being given. If this story reminded you that the people who do the quiet, honest work are always the ones who last, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone see you clearly, before you even knew you were being watched?